Have Elliott Hulse on the show today. I have been following you for a long time. Been checking out your Instagram. One, you you strike me as a strong, solid man who has done the work to get to know himself, and you speak with a lot of courage because some of the things that you say are unpopular.
Hmm.
And that is one thing that I've noticed over the years is people love to, you know, they love to stay popular. They don't want to say something that's challenging people and they might get attacked for. And especially someone like yourself, where I imagine that your business runs basically off of how popular you are.
Hmm.
And so for someone whose business runs off of their face and how they're known to come out and say stuff that's controversial, yeah, I really respect that. And we're going through some really trying times
Yeah.
right now, and you're somebody who I look up to as a really positive male role model. Like a lot of men in our culture right now need strong men to look up to, and I appreciate your presence. And even it's very obvious when I witness you and check out Instagram and stuff like that that you say and do things where I'm like, I don't really, I really don't think it's like that. But you know what? But I still respect it. It's
Hmm.
we have a little bit differing opinions. Um, and I think part of it is too is I think you practice more public courage than I do in some respects, and that can be a little challenging for me at times. So I'm excited about this show too because I believe it's going to actually push my own edges. Uh,
Yeah. You got to rub salt in the wound if you're going to know the wound is there. And we're walking around wounded, thinking that we're healthy. And every once in a while, I just dump some salt in there and rub it. Hey, did you forget that this shadow shit is there? Did you forget that these wounds there? Let me wake you up in a moment. Let me trigger that for you. And so I,
yeah,
I enjoy doing that.
yeah. So you're here to wake people up. So
I guess you can call it that. I mean,
everyone listening, you got to
something.
stick around. So we right before we hopped on, uh, one of the things I want to point out is with everything going on right now, I'm actually hesitant to make posts.
Hmm.
I'm I'm sitting back. I live. I've been out in the mountains for 3 months now. I'm not interacting with society heavily. I've got this. I feel like I have this bird's eye view, and I'm watching the
Yeah,
world burn.
right,
And I some people are being critical that I'm not participating in whatever way they think I should be participating.
right. Hmm.
Uh, and it's I don't know what's true in this situation.
Yeah.
Like I know, I mean, what is true is for in my perspective is just very few facts. There's very few facts in this
Hmm.
whole thing. And then there's these battling of narratives
Hmm.
that I'm witnessing. And people are getting upset and I'm watching people get sucked into a narrative. And I go, okay, I don't know if I can tell you exactly what you should be doing or thinking, but it's not that. Um, what are you seeing? Like, what is your experience of this right now? And well, before we get into that, I want to know your experience of this right now, but can you tell people like where you're coming from? Because some of the things I said at the beginning is it's obvious that you've done a level of work and self-reflection and that you are uh, really solid in your like king archetype. Uh, so like, what have you done to get to that place in your life?
Oh, I would have to point to my childhood.
Mm,
A number of things I had going for me. So I got to say that I'm blessed. Number one is I have a father. We're living in a world where there is a lack of father energy. There's a lack of fathers. There's a lot of lack of respect for authoritative alpha males. The world hates a strong father these days, with feminism being the law of the land, basically. And I was fortunate enough to grow up with a strong father. My father was not brought up in the same blue pill betafied school system that most of our all of us, me, you, and probably your father and grandfather grew up in. My dad grew up in the jungle. My dad grew up in the jungle of Belize. They ran around like the Lord of the Flies, barefoot, climbing trees,
And
and you
where
get
was
eaten
this? You
alive.
say Belize?
Belize, yeah,
Okay, okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Third world country. My dad only wore shoes 1 day a week. It was on Sunday to go to church. And he spent the rest of his time running wild. And interestingly, he didn't even have his father to any great degree because his father was so busy working that he had 12 children, and his dad was a trucker. And so he spends a lot of time on the road. My dad learned a lot of his attributes, his characteristics, and his wisdom literally in the jungle. You know, they say like the law of the jungle. My dad grew up in the jungle, and it's literally the law of the jungle. And so a lot of like you see me on social media promoting certain ideas that is foreign to a lot of people, but came naturally to my dad. And so, among many things, you know, I can spell out so many blessings I've had in my life. But it's to have a father, it's to have an alpha male, strong father, a father who was an authority in the home. He was a leader in the home. My father wasn't a slapdick. He disciplined us. He instilled values in us, and he had expectations for us. And it wasn't for us to be friends. That was not my father's expectation. Father's expectation was to raise us to be strong men in society, good, successful men in the world. And so he dedicated himself to that. I got two other brothers and a sister. And that is one of the greatest blessings of my life that has allowed me to, now it's been stages because I grew up in the feminized world like we all do. And I resented my father because of his strength, because my father was the antithesis to everything that we're told we're supposed to be as boys in school. Of course, my mother, she's a woman, so women want to control men, and they want to control their little boys also. The whole society is set up as a matriarch to control little boys. My father was not about any of that shit. He didn't care what the neighbors were doing. He didn't care what they said in school. He didn't care what the after-school TV program or commercials said about fathers. My father was a strong father. And so because of that, I resented him. I thought my dad was wrong, you know, through most of my teenage years. I fought against my father and I wanted to be everything that he wasn't, right? I wanted to be a nice guy. One of my father's sayings is like, nice guys finish last. And I used to even argue with him about that. And he's like, Dad, what do you mean nice guys finish last? You're just mean. And I would say, you're just a mean guy. You know, like the way people treat Donald Trump today. He's just a mean guy. No, he's a strong man. And so my dad would say, strong. My dad hates weakness. He abhors weaknesses. But anyway, it took me most of my 20s, really, until I had my own children and my children started growing a little bit, to really appreciate my father. I could not appreciate my father until I had my own children. And then I began to realize, oh, I can't be a nice guy. I can't be a pushover. I can't be a slapdick. I can't be weak. Otherwise, my children are going to run all over me and they're going to end up degenerate like the rest of this culture. So it was a process for me to come home to my father, which is one of the the ways that men become men, is to know their father.
Are you familiar with I think it's Tyler is it something Tytler where he talks about and this the book Fourth Turning talks about this as culture goes through these four phases where there is I'm gonna mess it up a bit, but I think you'll get the general idea, which is there is oppression or bondage, and then there is like religion comes in, and then that ends up leading to freedom in a way, and that freedom leads to abundance, and then that abundance ends up leading to bondage again.
Yeah.
And so the Fourth Turning in that book, it talks about this cycle as every fourth generation. Every fourth generation, we go through one of those cycles. And what it sounds like to me is your childhood was not indicative of mainstream America childhood. So like you're sitting outside of the generational, like our generation has got an incredible amount of abundance. And I read that I read about those cycles, and I sat back and I go, oh, we're in the abundance cycle right now. So are we about to run right into back into bondage? And is there a way that we can embrace what do we need to do to embrace freedom again? What has to happen? Or is there anything we can do about it? But it
Mhm.
sounds like the way you were raised inside of a different generation, with your father being from
Mhm.
somewhere else.
Yeah,
And
old
so
school.
you're gonna stick out. You're gonna stick out here. But we should probably, I mean, I think it's a good possibility we should listen to you. Uh, what what were there are there any practices that you have that uh like meditation practices? I mean, I have friends that have gone to your grounding camp and just said that your stuff is next level. Like some of the stuff that you're teaching, and it came from somewhere. Like, where did you learn this stuff?
Well, I'd say the number one most important, critical, key ritual, practice is the term you use for me, and my belief is for all men, is to lift. Men must be physically strong. And so, of course, for you and for me, that's like a duh, like, of course. But
Yeah.
there are those who argue, like, well, there's no reason for men to be strong anymore because we've got computers and whatnot. But what they're forgetting is that lifting is making use of the mechanism by which we experience life, and making your body strong makes everything strong. Making your muscular system strong. You got to eat better. You're making your organs stronger. In order to dedicate yourself to the discipline of consistent lifting, you have to have strong character. You see, so it's not just lifting so that I can have big biceps. It's lifting because it's the gateway drug to all personal development. It is, particularly for men, because men have testosterone. Women have to lift. I do believe that as well.
Yeah.
But it is incumbent upon us, based on the gift that we're given, to have strong bodies, because that's a big part of what separates us from women. Use it or lose it. I know a lot of us are losing it.
Yeah. Yeah. My experience with that has been just from a nervous system perspective. Pick up something once a
Mhm.
month. I want to pick up something that's a max load to
Yeah.
push my capacity. It wakes me up. It like you're saying, we're experiencing the world through this vessel.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not pushing it, you're not expanding the capacities. It's a very, if you don't push it, you're contracting.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so what are you witnessing? So I did a Google search. I look at you, I see your skin tone. I go, Elliott's a black guy. And I do a Google search, and then he's not black, he's biracial. Uh, does that mean anything to you? What those labels, or how do you
Well, it
identify?
does, because I'm not black. I'm not white. I don't consider myself black or white. But depending on the person and their agenda, they will very quickly put me into one of these categories. And so that I'm more of a toy for other people's divisive ideas than anything. But I know what it's like to be in between. And that comes with its own set of associations and issues. So I'm not going to fit neatly into any box. And in fact, I kind of wore that as a banner for much of my life. It's like, you're not going to put me into a box because you can't figure me out. You don't know what I am,
Yeah.
and it's not going to be that easy for you to tell me what I am, because you don't even know what I am. So therefore, I don't know. This is just my attitude about things. I transcend all your rules. Oh, I'm supposed to be a certain way because you think I'm something? Guess what? I'm not. You're wrong. And I'm going to be who I want to be. It comes with its curses, but it comes with its blessings. And one of the blessings is that as someone who is in between, you've got to connect with something that transcends the flesh. And because when I was a kid, I was asked very often, Elliott, what are you? Parents, teachers, other kids, what are you? That's a question that imprinted itself on my soul. what are you? And so, you know, as a lot of self-absorbed people grow up and start thinking, they ask themselves that question regardless of their race. What am I? Who am I? Well, here I am, like 10 years old, trying to figure that shit out. And that led me to philosophy and religion at a very young age, because I realized that, okay, I'm not just this, and you're not just that. There's got to be more. And so that expanded me into raising above the 3D, looking at the world from a broader perspective, looking at human beings and our spiritual essence as a reality rather than the things that separate us.
Do you find it problematic that people are identifying primarily with race right now?
Is it problematic? I don't think it's problematic to be what you are. To identify, you know, I'm a man. I identify with being man. Is that a problem? No, I don't think it's a problem. The problem comes when the forces of evil use it as a means to pit one another against each other, pit us against each other, and that's where we're at right now. Is where we've been for quite a while. So there are those puppet masters that are not just allowing us to be diverse and unified in our diversity, and having a civil nationalism and saying that we're Americans, and having a code of conduct and a way of being that befits all of us. It's more a matter of, oh, these guys don't like the way you are over here, and let's highlight the differences and pit you against each other. Yeah. And so right now, so-called racism is being used as a tool to scatter us, to divide us, to make us angrier, to have us focused on what's most base, what's most lowest vibration, and that is the color of our skin.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the lowest thing that they can drag us right down to keep us focused on. And so you see it playing out with the fear tactics the media is using, the anger tactics that they're using in order to control us. And I mean, it's working perfectly. Americans are being played.
Yeah. So someone who's listening to this, someone who's watching this, who has adopted a narrative, let's talk a little bit about that real quick. Can we name a few of the narratives? Because I've had people message me, and part of it is they're upset that I'm not buying into one of the narratives or the one that they prefer. And I'm sitting there going, well, this is like, I want to find out in this show is, how do we rise out of that narrative? How do we identify if we're stuck in a narrative that's not serving the greater good or even good for ourselves? But what are some of those narratives? Because I think that if we just say the word narrative, then people are like really quick to go, oh, that person, they're stuck in a narrative. I mean, like, we're all stuck in.
Think about the collective narrative that we all learned in public school. So you gotta understand, you were never a slave owner, and your grandfather was probably not a slave owner.
No.
You probably never met a slave owner. Your grandfather probably never met a slave owner. I don't know any slaves. Never met any slaves. I have lots of Black friends, Black family members. Their grandparents or great grandparents were not slaves. So when you use the word narrative, you got to think about stories. And when you think about stories, what are the history books that are shoved down our throats when we're in elementary school, full of particular narrative? And I remember, being in between, but I remember being in third grade and first learning about white oppression and the African slave trade, right?
Yeah.
That's a story. That's not reality. There are no slaves. There are no African slaves right now in America. Black people are freer and more entitled than ever. Probably the most free and entitled minority class anywhere in the world. Highly privileged. So when you take third graders and you shove this narrative in their hearts that you, white boy, should be ashamed of yourself because white people, just like you, put black boy over here and his ancestors in slavery. And right away, I noticed it right away. Like around that time when we were learning that, it's funny that it sticks out of my mind that the white kids all of a sudden started feeling either really guilty. And that's really what mostly is. Oh man, they start feeling guilty, and then the black kids started feeling angry.
Yeah. I remember being a kid and feeling very guilty. I grew up most of my life in Memphis, Tennessee. It's primarily black in that town. And I remember learning about that, and then I carried guilt most of my childhood because of that. That's very accurate. And I even, as an adult now, looking back on it, I resent the fact that I felt guilty.
Right.
Where I go, fuck, man, I wasted all that time. I wasted all that energy. And like, I hid a lot because I felt guilty.
Oh, and you probably hid, if you lived in a mostly black community, you hid because you would have got your ass whooped.
Oh yeah, I learned real quick not to share an opinion, even if I was for something, even if I'm in agreement. It was like, you better shut up. You don't know what you're talking about.
Right, you're not even allowed to have an opinion outside of that.
Yeah,
that narrative.
Yeah. So that's the greater narrative.
Right. Well, we have to look at everything that's happening right now is only available. It's like the fruits, but we got to look at the roots. We got to look at the roots of the destruction, this plan to destroy America. And a part of the plan to destroy America, we can talk about who that is and why that is, but was to infiltrate the school systems, the education systems, which they did a fine job of, public school systems, in order to create class warfare.
So who are they? When you say they, because I get in a lot of conversations where that is the case. And I go, well, they. I was like, well, who is they?
Well, first you got to begin with the ideology.
Okay.
The ideology comes from a Marxist. It's Marxist, humanist, communist. It is an ideology that brought Europe into its world wars. That destroys nations, destroys people, never works, has not worked, never proven to work. It's all about consolidating power into a ruling class and controlling people by making them angry with one another, by pointing out and highlighting differences. One of the terms they use today is identity politics, right? And so when I talk about they, it's a spiritual battle. So that's an idea. Ideas aren't tangible. It's an idea. It's something that's impressed on people's consciousness. So it's above just people. But when it boils down to the people, if you look into the history of post-World War II and the mass migration of Eastern Europeans into America, there didn't just come people, there came powerful men and their ideas. And so there's this, if you look up Operation Paperclip, you'll see where they took a lot of these social engineers, people like Wilhelm Reich and others, feminists, communists, people who seek to disband the social order of things. They want to create a new world. Were brought into America by the CIA. Operation Paperclip was a CIA operation.
By the way, I want to throw in here, what you're saying right now, 2-3 years ago, I'd have been like, he's crazy. And now I am right on board with you. It's become obvious.
Right. This has all been constructed.
Yeah.
This has all been made up. It's created. So what we're seeing are the fruits of those that being created. What that brought us was, just look at the 1960s. It brought us, and I would say, in my opinion, the worst demon of all that was brought in here. Of course, it was under the label of communism. That's the way I label it. That's the way they saw it in the 1950s. That's why everybody was so afraid of communism back then. Remember, like communism was a big boogeyman, but not anymore because they got into they're smart. They snuck in, and now they're in the minds of our children, and our children are rooting for communism right now. This is what they do. It's a long-term plan, and they're winning in a lot of ways, but they're not going to win totally. But the worst of all the demons that were imported, in my opinion, is feminism, because it attacks the family. And when you attack the family, you scatter the minds of the children, and they're more easily manipulated by the state and by the media. So the 1960s brought us a lot of garbage that we're seeing the fruits of right now. But the one that I think has definitely has destroyed all of us. But if you look at the Black community, the most went from 20% in the 1960s, 20% children being born out of wedlock, to 70%, over 70% now. What does that mean? Of course, feminism allowed that to creep in because it did a number of things, including destroy the family, and I can get into details, but it created generations of fatherless children.
Yeah. How does feminism do that? Like how? Because a lot of people, I mean, you're hitting a really hot topic right here,
mm-hmm.
because and I'm somebody, I've lived on the West Coast for 6 years. You say anything negative about feminism,
right?
You better,
Well, here, so let's
start running.
The Black community, because everything that's happening in the country is usually experimented on in the Black community. Right? They're the guinea pigs. And so what happened in the Black community? There became social welfare programs that encouraged Black women to have children, but no fathers. Because if there's a father in the home, the state ain't gonna give you money. So what happened was, and this is straight out of Hitler's playbook, he says, if you want to control the nation, you take the fathers out of the home and you make the women and children dependent on the state. Women and children only have their power because of the state. It's state sanctioned power. So divorce laws, how they've changed, divorce court, easy divorce, even abortion, to give anyone the right to kill, to murder, is deplorable. But even more so, a woman allowed to kill your baby, right? Because it takes two in the womb, and it be healthcare, right? Satan always shows up with light. It's so good for you. It's healthcare to murder your baby in the womb. So going back to Black communities, everybody's outraged by this Black guy that was killed by a cop, but nobody's saying anything about the over 600,000 Black babies that have been killed by abortion alone this year. 500,000 Black babies slaughtered in the womb. Nobody's saying anything about it. It's okay. That's the fruit of feminism.
You don't think there's an okay reason? I mean, just me trying to say the word good, a good reason to have an abortion.
My opinion,
yeah,
is that there's zero reason. But I have a little bit of leeway when it comes. I do have some leeway when it comes to rape. Not totally. I've known some. You talked about my grounding camp.
Yeah,
I met two young men on two different occasions that were the byproduct of rape, and they were beautiful young men, great young men, doing amazing things in their lives. They're wounded, of course, and they have that narrative and that experience embedded into their consciousness, but I am, and the people in their lives are so grateful for their presence, that they're here.
Yeah.
So again, I have a little bit of leeway, but not so much in terms of rape. But
yeah,
it's a hot topic.
Yeah, my take on a lot of the feminist movement, that I I'm actually in this really big philosophical shift right now in my life. I could have 100% with 100% confidence. I'm like, everyone's doing the best they can all the time with the information they have. And recently I'm going, I'm not sure everyone has good intentions.
Right.
And so it's a really big deal for me to go, oh shit, this I might be coming up against somebody who has a different intention than the greater good, and it's like shocking to me.
Did
So
you have a different intention than the greater good?
say what?
What was that you said? You're surprised?
Well, like I'm surprised that people would not have intentions for the good of themselves and the good of others.
Right.
And I'm beginning. It's really hot being highlighted. I'm like, because I've been practicing a lot of compassion over the years. I'm like,
Mhm.
and I needed to go through that. I needed to go through a phase where I need to be a lot of forgiveness, a lot of compassion, a lot of acceptance, a lot of love. Um, and now I'm moving into a space where I'm looking at things. I'm going, that has to be stopped.
Yeah.
That is actually wrong. And
Mhm.
I think or for me going through a phase of going like, oh, I have this compassion, there's no right or wrong, people are just trying the best they can, and I've been operating that way, and it's been very helpful in my
Mhm.
life.
How old are you?
And 38.
Yeah. Ah.
It's been very, very helpful.
Yep.
But recently I'm going, no, there's actual fucked up shit happening,
Mhm.
and somebody should stop it. um what can I do? Um, and I'm really doing a lot. I'm in a deep reflection around this right now. It's been the last ever since COVID hit. I've been in this deep reflective place where I'm going, things are not as they seem.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
and the thing about feminism that I've been locked into, and I talked to a guy that used to be, and I've hung out with a guy who used to be on the board of the National Organization for Women, and he talks about how he was the first man to be part of that group, and he now uh, is very big into helping young men develop. And what he
Mhm.
recognized is the feminist movement wasn't about being feminine at
No,
all. The
no, it
feminist
wasn't.
movement has been about women being masculine, and then it's doing things that men were doing and doing masculine things. And from my perspective, what I get from that is we had a lot of women move into a masculine trait. We have a very masculine woman in America right now, and there is no feminine, or the men are feeling like they need to go into more of a feminine role,
Right.
and
So
it's
this
there,
is
the
the shift
polarity is
towards
missing.
right.
And as a young man growing up right now, it's fucking confusing. Like,
Yes.
who am I supposed to be?
Right.
And being a strong man or showing any masculine traits could be interpreted as a threat. And so a lot of men are they take masculinity and they throw it away, and then they become feminine, and women don't find them attractive, and they don't know why. And
Right.
it's become a mess.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's all perfectly planned and orchestrated.
Yeah.
This is not arbitrary. You want to destroy a nation, which the communists want to destroy America. America's just too strong. And they don't want to just destroy America for vengeance. And I say they, and this is a very convoluted, and there's lots of different moving pieces to it. But there is this push towards globalism and a one world government. And America, God bless America. The world needs to recognize that America is the last bastion, the last hope for freedom on this planet. Because if you topple America, the rest of the world is going to follow suit. We are the leaders. We're the ideological leaders. We're the leaders in so many different regards. And so this big push right now, with all these scams, COVID was a scam. The race wars is a scam. And when I say a scam, doesn't mean that they're not there. It's how they were created and how they're being portrayed. They're all last ditch efforts of an evil cabal that wants to dethrone Donald Trump, who I believe to be the alpha male, strong man father that this country has needed so badly for so long, so that they can continue with their plan of destruction as it had unfolded through the Clintons, the Bushes, and the Obamas. And so we got a guy who I believe is saving America. And all his actions prove that to me.
Yeah, I've witnessed. Man, this is. I'm like, oh my god, we're getting into crazy. This is crazy territory for me. All right, but like, there's things I have a lot of private conversations, and then there's what I post publicly. And one thing I'm noticing is I stepped out of well, to do a lot of reflection with myself. I stepped out of politics back in 2012. I was like, I'm so glad I did, because I now view it so differently. It's more of like, oh, these are pawns and games, and there's this manipulation and influence going on here and there. But I am witnessing a lot of people who are, I notice the people who are very sovereign, like they recognize their own sovereignty, being attracted to Trump, and people who think that someone outside of themselves needs to come save them really hate Trump.
Yeah.
That's like the really big thing that I'm noticing. And for me, when I watch what's going on, yeah, a lot of my friends would hate for me to even say any of that kind of stuff, because they might be like, "Oh, I'm sovereign," and but I hate him, and I think he's a bad guy. And I imagine that people, I mean, talking about like their agenda, look at you. I did see you put a Trump sign in your front yard on Instagram, maybe a month ago, and I imagine there's people that are going, I can't believe a black man would like Trump. I mean, what do you say to that?
That's racist. You're
Yeah.
racist. White liberals are the most racist people on the planet, because they think blacks need to think a certain way, and that if they don't, they're not black. Do you know what Joe Biden said? Did you catch that?
I saw a meme. I don't believe memes. I'm entertained by them, but like, yeah, what did he say?
He was on his radio show with a black host, and the black host asked him, tell us what the difference is between you and Donald Trump. Like, why should we vote for you instead of Donald Trump? And he goes, if you, then Biden goes, if you don't know whether you should vote for me or Donald Trump, you ain't black. Think of the audacity. That means black people can't think. And that's what they're hoping. They're hoping black people don't think, so that they just respond and react based on emotions.
Yeah. My experience in all of this right now is any negative messages I've received has been from young white men.
Yeah, because they got that self-loathing, guilt, virtue signaling thing going on for them. It makes them the worst.
What this term is getting thrown around more and more. White privilege. What do you think about that?
I don't put too much stock in that term. I really don't. Where do I begin? It's a made-up word used to make one segment of the population feel guilty for what they've done, which is great stuff. White people built America. White people the thing like stolen, steal, all the praise and glory goes to the conqueror. But in our own history books in America, white people are denigrated for the great thing that they did. Imagine this place was still run by Indians. They didn't even have written language yet. And so privilege, a lot of times privilege goes to where it should go. Now, when it's used as a divisive term to create separation, it means that just by virtue of your whiteness, you get stuff that other people don't. By virtue of your whiteness, your ancestors did stuff that other people didn't, that maybe puts you in a better situation. But in America, we all have privilege. We all have opportunity. Black people in America are more privileged than any Anybody else in the rest of the world, go to Africa. You ain't gonna get that kind of privilege that you get here. You're not gonna get the government giving you handouts. You're not gonna get white people bowing down, kowtowing. A big part of what keeps this narrative going is white people. Whenever you and the black people that receive that that build up that indignation that's associated with it, they resent even more the white people who are feeling guilty. It's almost like people resent those who bend to their will. People resent weakness. And so black people are even more resentful of guilty white people, because it's almost like when if somebody's getting beat down in a fight, that rage that comes up in that person that's beating them gets even more, because I can see you running. I can see you getting weak. And so the anger gets even more. So it's like this is fuel on the fire. So when you use terms like white privilege, it's just adding fuel to the fire, making white people feel weaker and guiltier, and making black people angrier and angrier. So it's working, but I don't believe in the way it's used.
I think it's a very it's kind of like saying when you're working out, oh, it hurts. Like, you ever been, you're a trainer, you've been a trainer, I'm a trainer, I'm training somebody and they're like, oh, it hurts. I'm like, is it burning? Is it a sharp pain? Is like, what's actually going on? And I was like, oh, it's just burning. I'm like, cool, we want that. But if it's a sharp pain in your back, let's stop doing the deadlifts. And it comes down to being more like having a bigger vocabulary and being more granular. And when I hear white privilege, I have an assumption about your perspective, your history, your experience in life because of the color of your skin. And I'm going to assume that you can't understand me at all. So F you. That's when I hear that, that's my experience of it coming from where I'm at. And what would be a much more granular approach. And like a lot of people go, have you really sat with your white privilege? And I go, well, I've done the work, and that I realize that my perspective, my history, the lens in which I view the world has been shaped by my ancestors and me, and this is where I'm at. And it's different than even my brother, my blood brother. It's different than my friends. It's different than, it doesn't matter what color someone is. It's like, I have a different perspective, and I understand that you have a different perspective, and I completely respect and honor that. But to just blanket white privilege when it should be like, we should all just honor each other as human beings and acknowledge that we all have different experiences, because not every black person's had the same experience. Not every white person's had the same experience. And it's this lumping everything in one category and just saying, oh, it's pain. And when you go out there and you just throw blanket statements out there like that, then there's like no actual understanding. But I do remember, I was growing up, I grew up in a town where, like, Memphis, Tennessee, if you're white, you probably can get away with more than if you're black. I remember getting pulled over. I got pulled over several times. I had my car searched by police and things like that when I was younger, and they just let me go. And I totally recognized when I was 16, 17 years old, I was like, if I was black, I'd probably get arrested right now for being out past curfew or whatever it is that was going on.
How do you know it wasn't based on the way you behaved with that officer?
It could have been.
Regardless of the color of your skin.
Yeah.
You talk about white privilege, but there's black privilege. There is 100%. I would say there's more black privilege in this country than white privilege, because blacks are allowed to get away with, in many different instances, bad behavior, poor behavior. And when they're called on it, it's racism.
Well, how would you, we have a high percentage of blacks in prison. There's obviously some type of discrepancy here. And a lot of people point at right now they're pointing at institutionalized racism.
We got to look at what's real though also, because a lot of these are trigger terms that are made up in order to manipulate our minds and to confuse us. If you look at the Department of Justice statistics on crime, interracial crime, right? Since that's one of the things that we're talking about right now. Black against white crime. Black people hurting violently white people is 10 times higher than white on black crime. Just go to the Department of Justice website and look up interracial statistics. You will find that 10 times, and blacks only make up, 14% of the population. So if you extrapolate that, that's a big number more of black people attacking white people. Why are we focused on, because I see the pie chart in my mind, because I was looking at it today. Why are we focused on this level of crime that's happening, white on black, when it's this level of crime that is disproportionately higher, blacks and whites? What is that about? Like, I just want to answer to that, to everybody who talks about privilege. It looks to me like these people are privileged because the media doesn't talk about all the crimes that they're committing, the blacks are committing against whites. You don't hear about that, even though statistics show, facts prove that it's 10 times higher. To me, that sounds like privilege. It sounds like you have the privilege of the media to cover up what you're doing and then focus on what the whites are doing. Because again, it's the plan, it's going according to plan, because the plan is to destroy America. And to destroy America, you have to denigrate those who are the leaders in America, which are white men. So you got to do everything that you can to destroy the image of white men. And that's why the media points out this instead of that.
Yeah. What about there being a high percentage of black men in prison?
They do more of the crime. They're supposed to be in jail. If you commit more crime, there's gonna be more of you in jail. Now, I have some problems with many of the laws out there. I believe there are a lot of men that are in jail that don't belong there, regardless of their color, because of some bullshit laws. But when it boils down to it, black people are committing more crimes. It's just a fact. It has nothing to do with my feelings, has nothing to do with my race, has nothing to do with anybody's race. If you're committing more crimes, you're gonna be more in jail. And then they'll use this idea of systematic racism, but I don't believe that exists either, because every single day, black men, black women pull themselves up out of the ghetto and do great things in their lives. Every single day. To say that systematic racism is what's keeping you oppressed, you are relinquishing your responsibility to do the right thing, to seek out the right way. And you're relying on that privilege that we're talking about right now, and the state-funded degeneracy that allows you to stay that way. Have 7 baby daddies, 13 kids, and the state will pay for you. So systematic racism actually shows up as privilege. It shows up as entitlement. The more entitled you make a group of people, the more they're going to be oppressed, because now they need you. Like the slave needs the master, because the master feeds you. But as soon as the slave runs away and he has to feed himself, he's gonna man up, he's gonna toughen up, he's gonna do the right thing, he's gonna be a righteous person. As long as they stay on that plantation of voting for Democrats and getting their entitlements, they're gonna stay degenerate. Why change?
What would, man, you're blowing my mind right now. This is, I'm speechless.
Because this is not nice stuff, because again, the narrative.
It's not, and part of it is I'm imagining people listening to this and being like, getting angry with me. Like, oh, because what you're saying is, I do worry to a degree what people think of me, and I like to think that I don't, but that's what's coming up for me now. I'm like, oh shit, this is going to trigger half of my audience probably. And that was, I mean, I knew that you would do that. So this was something where I woke up this morning, I was like, oh, I'm a little scared. Yeah.
But if you look, here's the thing. When you take fathers out of the home, you make women the main caretaker of, I'm talking to men right now, caretaker of men. So little boys grow up to have minds like their mother. And so what does a woman do? How do women basically operate in our society or just in the world? Their nature is to react irrationally and emotionally. And it's good. There's a good reason why. Biology evolved them that way. So if you're a man listening to this right now and you're getting triggered emotionally, recognize you're operating with the mind of your mother, because you probably have a weak father. You have no father, which is a byproduct of everything I'm talking about right now. But stop for a moment, set your emotions aside for a moment, be a man, think logically, and look at the facts. Not CNN. Don't, if you're getting your facts, and by the way, if you're getting your facts from any mainstream media outlet, those aren't facts. That's propaganda. It's legal propaganda under something that was passed under the Obama administration, where the news is allowed to be propaganda. Isn't that crazy? I feel crazy.
That's crazy.
You're getting propaganda. Go get facts. Like I was just talking about crime statistics and why it's so skewed, but yet we see a different story. Go look it up. Go get the facts. Go get logical, and then come back and.
But Elliott, it's hard. It's hard.
Right, exactly. It's easier to go on your emotion and what you're being triggered to think and feel and do through the media. And that's where we're at. That's why we're so weak.
Yeah, one of the big problems I'm seeing right now is if you do watch mainstream media, it is only covering what's happening today. They do no work to link something. I was like, oh, this was passed 10 years ago, or this is something that happened 10 years ago, and this is leading to this. The conversation that you're having is over a century of this is something that's been happening over time, and you've got a much bigger view of what's happening. Whereas people who are on the teat of CNN, MSNBC, Fox, all these mainstream media outlets is pretty much just pointing out what's happening today or this week. And so it's just little snapshots, and it doesn't require any work. It doesn't require any effort. It doesn't require people to read. And I think that's a huge problem right now, is what I'm witnessing, is just the amount of instant gratification. The news is entertainment. It is propaganda for sure. Because if I do a search on Google for one thing, I'll find 10 different articles that are all saying the same shit. Like I can't find good information from these news agencies, but that's the information that most people are relying on.
Right.
And it's really, really sad. And the conclusion I've gotten to, and I've had to get real with myself, is if I'm not willing to go out and find the information and really dig and set aside my emotional responses to things, I'm just being lazy. I'm saying, you know what? I am going to ignore that information on purpose because I don't want to do the work.
Right.
And so that is what good leader does that. A good leader would step in. And so I got to know the truth. I got to know what the information.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back to something that you said early in the interview. Which you were talking about slavery. Like I get what you're saying. The slavery as a story, you're in third grade, you're learning about it, and that is what initiates the tension between races. Right. And people will hear that and they'll say, but slavery did happen. It is true. And by the way, I've
How
learned.
do they know it's true? Even see, I'm gonna drop another bomb in here. If the media news of today is skewed, is not true, and we're kind of asserting that, then what do you think about the history books? You think those are true? I guarantee you 90% of what we're taught in our history books is not true. And I'm convinced that so-called slavery isn't what they tell us it is. I think that it's embellished. I think it's a lot of fabrication and a lot of sensationalism, particularly through Hollywood. They love to push that shit. But I question the history books.
Yeah, I'm with you. So I remember in my 20s learning that there was alternative history books. And I remember, by the way, I was homeschooled. So I actually don't have as much of the traditional education as the average person. Mm-hmm. Very fortunate, very, very fortunate. The older I get, the more I realize that the level of freedom that I operate in as an adult is due to the fact that that my parents taught me how to be independent. But I remember, my mom still got like the history book, right? And I still read the history book, and it was a single point of view. And then I remember there being alternative history books, and some that were painting a much darker picture, and some that were, right. And there was like all these. I go, oh wow, this is in direct conflict with what I learned growing up.
Right.
And I go, wow. So I'm like, well, what I learned as a child was that bullshit. I mean, this sounds more realistic or more believable for whatever reason. And then uh I got into learning how the mind works and how the mind loves to attach to a story,
Yeah.
and it relies on it. And then I started realizing, well, what's true and what's not true.
Mm-hmm.
And I go, and I'm with you. I got to the same conclusion. I go, fucking none of the history books are right.
Right.
Like no matter, they're pulling out references and this and that. And but I mean, most of the history is being written off of what somebody wrote back then.
Right.
And whoever was writing
Or
it back.
someone who has an agenda decided to piece together.
Yeah, because if you read if we in 100 years, if we look back on the history of 2020 and they watch the news or just read the newspapers, that's not telling hardly any of the story or of what's really going on.
Right.
So what do you think is true right now? What do you think is really at play here? You're talking about I see these different narratives. There's the Antifa narrative that, being someone, if you're conservative and you're looking at that, you're going, oh wow, they're in there trying to stir stuff up. They're handing people bricks. They're doing all that. And then there's the narrative that I saw something really interesting. I saw this video of these two white cops. You may have seen it. I think it was in LA. And this white lady, she was spray painting all this
Yeah.
graffiti. And I saw it posted on a conservative Instagram account. And then all the comments was like basically saying, oh wow, that's really messed up. They're causing all these problems, da 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 da. But it was more like, are they Antifa? Are they like, what group are they with? What's their intention? Was the conversation in the comments. And then I saw, I think it was last night, Snoop Dogg posted the same exact video, and the comments were pretty blanket comments about how fucked up white people are and how fucked up cops are. So even if we're watching the same video, the perspective in which someone's viewing that is
Mhm.
painting that picture. They have this narrative, and it was actually really cool for me to see, because within a 24-hour period, this guy who's a conservative, and you got Snoop Dogg over here, very different audiences, and it was interesting to watch that go down. What narratives are you seeing at play, and do you think of that differently? Do you see like there's these ideologies that are at war, and then these ideologies are using these narratives, or how do you view that?
Yeah, you're heading in the right direction, which is up. So, if you watch what's being played out, you're caught in the carnal level, the material level, the matrix. The word matrix even comes from material, maternity, mother. You're attached to sensation. You're attached to feelings. You're attached to the flesh. To really understand what's going on, you got to take your eyes off the tree and see the forest. You got to raise up. You got to rise up. And so by you talking about ideologies, you're taking one step higher, one step out of the physicality and the emotionality of it, which is hypnotizing us. If you're looking at things and making judgments based on what you see and what you feel, you're hypnotized. You're being completely manipulated. You got to rise up.
Hypnotize basically means suppression of knowledge.
Yeah, you can't think. You're not thinking.
Yeah.
But if you can be a little bit objective, and what you talked about was the interplay of ideologies, you can start stepping up. You can start ascending. You can start being enlightened, right? I say being enlightened means lightening up so that you can float, so you can get a little bit higher, so you can see things. And so if you start recognizing the ideologies that are at play, you can separate people from it. It's not white versus black. It is not white versus black. That's the distraction. That's the Maya. That's the illusion. The illusion raises up into this conflict of ideologies. And when you raise up into the conflict of ideologies, you can now discern things a little bit better. right? You can weigh things a little bit better because you're not caught up in emotion and you're not caught up in what you see and feel, which is great because now you can be a little bit more rational. But if you want to really rise up, you got to start recognizing that this is a spiritual battle and this is spiritual warfare, and that this is an ongoing fight between good and evil that's omnipotent, omnipresent, ever expanding, and always going on. This is why it's written that we are, I mean, if you want to look at where we're at right now so that you make better sense of things, read Revelations, read the Bible. That is wisdom literature passed on so that we can see what's happening when we're getting there. It's almost like people who are born in the springtime, reading a book, or let me put it this way, better. People who are born in the heat of summer, reading a book about, oh, there's a season of winter coming. You see what I'm saying? It's like an almanac in many ways. It's like reading a farmer's almanac when you read the Bible, you read wisdom literature, scripture. You want to look at it from a Hindu perspective, they call it the Kali Yuga, this cycle of time. You look at it from an astrological, which I am a fan of astrotheology. I think that the stars have been a poignant way for us to know ourselves, and many of our religions and myths are based off of. Think about the sun. We're at the end of a cycle. They said 2012, the world was going to end. But because we're trapped in the time-space continuum, we were like, oh, 2012, I guess the world ended. And then everybody's like laughing. It's not that the world was just, nobody was just going to turn off the TV like the world ended. We're at the end of an age. We made up calendars, and we've had all different kinds of calendars, so it's not specific. But we're at the end of an energy cycle, and we're moving into the chaos that is always present before a reordering into a higher order of things. And so when in the Bible he talks about, during this time there will be a separation, you're seeing the separation. It's a clear separation, and it's good and evil, right and wrong. And I'm happy that you were able to come out of that abyss, because I know what that abyss is like, to be trapped in that place where everything's relative. I think we have to go into that. I know for a fact that for the psychological development of men, that we have to go into that. There's one author who writes about how a man becomes a king, and he goes from high warrior into an abyss. He has to deconstruct all parts of himself and then reconstruct himself. And a part of that reconstructing of your psyche, you're going through it, I've gone through it, is the reordering of right and wrong.
That's exactly what's happening right now. And it's interesting that it started hitting me right before there's this huge moral thing happening in the world. Mm-hmm. There's direct application. Mm-hmm. I'm watching it unfold in front of me, and
we're blessed to be alive at this time.
Yeah,
have these experiences, to be seeing this. We've got one foot in two different ages.
Yeah. Can you speak to good and evil for those who may be operating in moral relativism, where it's like, there's no really good or evil. Everyone's just trying the best they can.
Well, it's not so simple, but here's a great way to see it. Good is life engendering, generative, life-giving. Evil is destructive, life negating, tearing down, chaos. You see what I'm saying? So a lot of times, if you want to pin something up and ask, is it good or evil? We talked about abortion before. Well, is it good? Well, if a woman needs to pursue her career, or she's the 0.1% that was raped, because that, I wanted to say that before with regard to rape, it's a very, 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 very small percentage. You might think it's good because you're not measuring it against my litmus test. Is it life-giving or life-negating? Murder, life-negating. So for abortion to be labeled as evil is very obvious, life-negating. Let's look at it in a more, in not such a base way, but in an ideological way. The entitlements that keep Blacks trapped. It's free money. It puts food on poor people's tables. Is it life-giving? in a way, but human beings have a potential. And to give someone handouts is life negating, because now he doesn't expand. He's not going to go and try. He's not going to apply himself. He's not going to grow. It's not engendering. Giving someone a skill is life engendering. Giving someone a handout is life negating. You see? So we can start pinning all these things against that fitness test, but there's lots of different, there are many different ways to look at it. One thing you got to recognize though is that evil always shows up beautiful. It's always beautiful. That's why Lucifer was the angel of light. He was the most beautiful of all angels. Do you think that's a mistake? He's the most beautiful of all angels. And so we got to be very, very careful, because what's packaged as good is oftentimes rotten to the core.
Yeah. Well, what do you think about, so if it's life negating, don't we need death to have life? There's the cycle of life and death. I get the generative versus destructive.
Mm-hmm.
But are you saying that death is evil?
That's a good question. This is where it gets sticky, and that's why I had to give a caveat.
Gotcha.
Because it's natural. And here's one of the best ways to approach all of this is not to have an opinion, not to have too much of an opinion, and don't be attached to our opinions, because it's being attached to the dust, to the way things seem. But you pointed out, and I agree with you, that life does this. With every sunrise, there's a sunset. With every birth, there's a death. And so without breakdown, there's no build up. Same reason why you're reconstructing your ego now as you're reaching 40 years old. Yeah. The only way you can reconstruct your ego now is if you would have had that breakdown.
Yeah. It was a total destruction. Yeah. It was a sketchy time there for a bit. But yeah.
You have to have a breakdown to have a build up.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things also I want to point out too, because I'm very opinionated, and so I don't expect everyone to agree with me, and I'm sure you don't expect everybody to agree with you, but one of the things that's most sovereign, you used that term before, is picking your boundaries, picking your beliefs, picking your values, and not needing anyone to affirm it, not needing to prove it, just being it, right? Because a lot of times there's a knowing that goes beyond even logic. Yeah,
yeah. Anything else you want to leave the audience with? Imagine, the majority of my audience is 25 to 45-year-old men. There's a lot of young men that need more direction. Is there anything you want to leave them with?
Man, there's so much, but I'm glad that it's a lot of men here. And if you don't recognize that there's a crisis in men in this world right now, I just implore you to wake up a little bit. A lot of what we've been told about being good boys was false. It's not going to make you more attractive to women. It's not going to make you successful in your life. My advice is explore being a bad boy a little bit, because being a bad boy means standing your ground, choosing your boundaries, choosing your values, and not being washed over and carried by the emotions that the world is spilling over on you.
Elliott, thank you so much. Wise words. And I appreciate you giving us your time. And
great.
Yeah, man. Anything, where should people follow you? You're on Instagram. I know you've got some stuff going on. Tell us all about it.
If you like the things I talk about, follow me on Instagram at Elliott Hulse. Most of what goes on Instagram repopulates on Facebook. So Elliott Hulse there. And I usually put my Instagram videos up on YouTube. I got a lot of YouTube videos, a lot of YouTube subscribers, but I don't really use it that much anymore. So there's that. And if I make any offers, buy it.
Do it.
Buy my stuff.
Yeah, man.
It's great. I got a King Transformation Coaching Program. Get into it. I do live events, Grounding Camp. These are events where men get together. We have these kinds of conversations, and we do the hard work to become strong men. It's not for everyone. A lot of people are triggered, and that's good. That means I'm waking you up a little bit, and maybe it's even more of a reason to come and hear more about what I got to say.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Appreciate you.
You got it, Michael. Thank you for the invitation.